This is the moment we all have been waiting for a number of weeks. The World Cup is coming to an end, and after watching this video, you know who is going to be the winner. Is it either world's number one, Magnus Carlsen? Is he going to win the World Cup for the very first time? Or is it Praggnanandhaa, who made his debut in this tournament, only 18 years old? Reaching the final is already a fantastic achievement by the young Indian, but he wants more, and he's playing in the first game of the tie breaks, 25 minutes plus 10 seconds increment. He's playing with the white pieces. Let's have a look. 1 e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. Pragg goes for the Italian opening. Knight f6, d3, bishop c5. And here, various ways of playing. Very often moves like c3 or castling or knight c3 have been played here. But Pragg goes for a line he's a specialist in. He goes for the move a4, and that was his choice in earlier in the tournament when he played with David Navarra. He managed to eliminate the Czech Grandmaster as well. Interesting move. Black goes for the move d6, castling kingside, and now a5 is going to be played anyway. So both bishops are safe whenever they come under an attack. They can drop back either to b6, a7 or to b3, a2, depending, of course, what is exactly gonna happen. Both a pawns are prevented from further expansion. And Pragg played here the move bishop e3, offering the exchange of bishops. And after bishop takes e3, f takes e3, we have a typical position with double pawns on the e file. But most importantly, white has opened up the f file for its rook, and this is a nice plan I've often played myself as a teenager when I was starting to learn the moves. It's a very typical plan. It's very popular among club players, and Pragg goes for very same idea. So it's not only for club players. Castling kingside, knight bd2, getting the knight into the game, and well, black has various ways to continue the game. But the main question, of course, is how is black eventually going to cope with the pressure on the f-file? Potentially the bishop and the rook, they're really strong. So in an earlier game this year, Aronian against the Giri in Wijk aan Zee, the Dutchman played here bishop e6, saying, okay, you can also take on e6, and then we both have double pawns, restoring the symmetry in the position. It's absolutely fine for black as well. But Magnus played here the move knight e7. Typical plan, as the knight wants to come over to the king side. That's one idea. Second idea is that after knight to h4, preventing, well, not really preventing, the knight can still come to g6. But if you do so, maybe the knight will come into f5. So Magnus keeps that knight on e7, at least for the moment, and plays here the move c6. This is the second idea. Now you can place your pawn there, and after queen e1, the idea is to play here the move d5. That has been made possible because the knight is excellently supporting the pawn on d5. I like this play for black. After e takes d5, c takes d5, black gets a nice space advantage in the center with easy piece play. Looks good. I should also mention that, well, after a move like bishop b3, which was played in the game, white has simple plan of getting the queen over to the king side with the move queen g3. That was the idea of queen e1, and it's part of the plan of doubling the pawns on the e file. You have an open f file for your rook, and the queen can nicely join the attack as well. So how is black gonna proceed? Well, it's very important to maintain your pawn on d5. If you think I'm going to take on e4, and after knight takes, pawn takes, saying that white's pawns are really ugly, that's true, but white has tremendous pressure with the queen coming in, the rook can come to the d file, or maybe you're going to double rooks on the f file as well. And I think the piece activity is way more important than the structural advantage black has here. So I like white very much. Magnus, of course, understands that the pawn on d5 needs to stay there to kill that bishop on b3. Queen d6 was played, overprotecting the knight, supporting the pawns in the center. Queen to g3. And now knight h5, questioning what the queen is doing there. Well, Pragg comes in with his queen to g5, attacking the knight. And here's the move g6. So the question is if this is not a weakening of Black's king's position. And Prag played here the move knight f5. Very tempting continuation. We will discuss it in a bit. But maybe the simple move knight h2 f3 also makes sense, because you're increasing the pressure on that pawn on e5. Together with the queen and knight, you're basically forcing Black to play f6. And if the queen goes back to h4, I like White's position. Why? Well, there's this open file. Black has made 2 pawn moves in front of the king. Knight is not ideally placed here. The bishop gains in strength. Now we have provoked Black to play f6. Still, there's plenty to play for, but I think the opening can be called a success for White. In any case, Prag didn't play it. He went for the move knight to f5, attacking the queen, attacking the knight, so you cannot take with the g-pawn because of the pin. Bishop takes f5 is the logical move, and after e takes f5, of course, Black is not advised here to take that pawn with its knight. It does allow rook takes f5. The g-pawn is pinned still, and that means that White is winning material. After e takes f5, king g7 is played, and I think that's a very important move, because if you don't play so, White was about to play a move like f6 to attack the knight, and together with a queen and a pawn, there are a lot of mating threats. The only thing you need to do is eliminate that knight later on. Magnus doesn't want to allow it. Played king to g7, and looks as if he is in control. Everything is okay. If you play aggressively with a move like g4, the knight can come back to f6. So White doesn't gain anything with that. A move I like here for White is to bring the other piece into the game with a move like rook a2 e1. The reason the rook is doing well here is quite subtle, because in the game Prag played another waiting move. He played king h1, but I think he's losing the momentum with his move as queen f6 is played. And White is for a choice, accepting the exchange of queens or keep queens on the board. Queen takes f6 was played, but it's not the ideal move. I think White's idea was to play for a kingside attack, possibly. But if you go for the move queen to g4, keeping the queens on the board, it's the only available square for the queen without being captured by another piece. There is knight takes f5. The pawn can be taken this time. The queen supports the knight. If you think there is this move e4, attacking a pinned piece, it does allow Black to play the move knight to e3. And this is a huge move, because you're solving the pin by setting up a counter-attack. After rook takes f6, there's knight takes g4, queens are off the board, Black has won a pawn, and that's really big news. Now you understand, if we go back one move, if after a move like e4 the rook would have been on e1, the e3 square would have been under control, and knight to e3 would not have been an option. Therefore, rook a e1 was more precise. But after king h1, queen f6, Prag goes for the exchange of queens. Knight takes f6. No problems here at all for Black. He has a nice center. White has a bishop versus a knight, but that bishop is not able to do much yet. Pawn on f5 is hanging as well. F takes g6. How to recapture? You can capture with a piece or with a pawn, but h takes g6 is by far the best move, as now you have a very nice pawn chain, no pawn weaknesses at all. I really like this setup. e4 is played, and White is probably planning to bring the rook to e1, so that later on you can take on d5 and attack the pawn on e5. Knight d7 is a very nice move, but it was not played. The idea is to go f6, followed by knight c5, attacking the bishop. The knight can be rerouted to e6. Black is maybe even a bit better, but Magnus had a different plan, goes for d takes e4. After d takes e4, White is having an isolated pawn. If you compare the pawns on the king side between White and Black, it's clear that the pawn on e4 is the main possible target later on. Rook a8, attacking the knight, occupying the open file. Rook to f2, protecting the knight. Rook to d4. Here you see the pawn is immediately coming under an attack. And what should White do? Should White really try to defend the pawn? No, Prag goes for the counterattack. Rook af1, doubling the rooks here. And now Black could take the pawn on e4, but after knight takes, rook takes, the pawn on f7 is hanging. Rooks will be exchanged. King goes away. Of course, the knight on e7 cannot be captured in view of rook e1. With a back rank mate, we should take it back. Instead, king g1 is a good move to centralize the king and make sure there's no back rank mate. But here you see The knight is on the threat. If the knight goes away, the pawn on b7 will be taken. This is a razor-sharp position, but white also has chances to play for a win. Magnus doesn't want to allow the counterplay by allowing white to take on f7, and therefore he plays a kind of a set move, knight e to g8. Knight is passively placed, but it's with a clear purpose of maintaining that knight on f6. White played the move c3, and now the rook goes back to d7, overprotecting the pawn on f7. After rook to e2, the rook went to e7. You may think, what is going on here? But at least the pawn is now nicely defended. White could still play knight c4, so that the pawn on e5 is defended, pawn on a5 is hanging, but it's not clear at all. With a concrete line, this didn't happen in the game, by the way, but after something like b5, knight takes a5, you can play rook c7, intending to trap the knight. And after bishop c2, rook a8, the only way to save the knight is b4. After b takes a4, bishop takes a4, c5. Black is solving all the problems, but likely this is going to end in a draw. Now you want to see what happened in the game. Instead of knight c4, which is the active continuation, Pragg played bishop c2 first. Possible, but after knight d7, black is improving its knight as well. And after knight to c4, the rook can come to a8 to protect the pawn. But you see, black is doing okay, but he needs to hold the position together. And I'm really surprised by Pragg's play here. I think after rook e to f2, followed by something like knight d6, white is having a bit of pressure for sure. But instead, he plays a very aggressive pawn move g4. So you're probably intending to go g5 and then fix the pawn on f7. Later on, the knight will come to d6. You have 4 possible attackers and it's difficult to deal with that pawn. Knight f6 could be a good move with the idea to meet g5 with knight h5. The knight will land on f4 very soon. Magnus had a different plan. Play the move f6 and now rook to g2. Very interesting, intending to go g5 and force the f-pawn to move, after which black's pawn on e5 will no longer be supported by the pawn on f6. If you prevent g5 by playing g5 yourself, knight d6 can be played, attacking the pawn, and the knight comes into f5. You cannot allow the weakening of that square. So instead, knight h6 was played, intending to bring that knight to f7, but Pragg is first, goes for g5, fg5, rook takes g5, knight f7, attacking the rook. The rook goes back to g2, and now it's rook to e6, so that after rook to d2, the knight is on the threat. You may move your knight, but Magnus says, I want to exchange one pair of rooks. By offering this exchange, black takes away the pressure against the knight on f7. There's no pressure on the f-file any longer. Knight cannot be taken as black is about to take on f1. So rook takes f6, knight takes f6 was played. More and more pieces are coming off the board. And that's good news for black, because this bishop, it's looking at its own pawns. And that's a bad sign, obviously. Pragg wants to play actively, goes for the move b4. And after a b4, c b4, he's having 2 nice pawns here, still protected by the bishop on c2. Magnus brings its king to the center, king f8. King g2, king e7, so the king nicely placed in the center, guarding possible entry squares for the rook. Black is in good shape, but now white plays the move a5, fixing the pawn on b7. After rook h8, black is bringing its rook into the game. And look, this rook is looking for a way to come to h4 to attack that pawn on e4. And note that the pawn on e5 is well defended. It can always be protected by a king or by a knight, so there are no serious problems for black here at all. I think white should play actively, forget about the pawn on e4, so that after rook h4 there is rook b2. This was not Pragg's plan. The idea is that after taking the pawn, you're very fast generating counterplay with your rook. If you take on b5, rook takes b5, the pawns on b7 and e5 are hanging. Pawns are going to be swapped very soon, and likely that's going to be okay for white to stay in the game. Instead, rook e2 played, now knight h5, threatening knight f4 with a deadly knight fork. King back to g1, but Magnus seizes the initiative. The knight comes into the game, hits the rook. Rook to d2, and now the rook also enters via the H file. Rook A3, excellent idea. You can feel the pressure. This is something you don't want to experience with white. I mean, maybe this is still playable, but black is dominating with its forces, and there are quite a number of pawn weaknesses white needs to think about. And Pragg couldn't resist here. Play the move A6, looking for counterplay, so that after b takes a6, he goes for the move bishop a4, attacking the pawn on c6, intending knight a5. Rook to c3 was played. Maybe the move rook c2 should have been played here, allowing the exchange of rooks. Maybe black would have kept rooks on the board anyway. In any case, after rook to c3, knight a5 played. But look now, knight to g5. This is a big move. Could have been played even one move earlier. You're attacking the pawn, but the huge threat is to give a knight fork once again on the king and rook. So you see these knights, they're taking over now. White's bishop is absolutely useless. Rook to c2. Knight g2 a3. Check. The king cannot move to the second rank. Got to stay on the back rank somehow. You may go into the corner. King f1 was played, and it basically comes down to the same. Because here there is this move rook to a3, attacking the bishop. And the main problem is that you can move your bishop away, but on the next move there will be rook a1 with checkmate, because the knight on f4 covers e2 and g2. The knight on h3 covers the f2 square. So this is a beautiful mating pattern with a rook and two knights. Knight takes c6 played, capture a pawn with check, but after king f6, the double attack is still in the position, and the only way to avoid mate is to give up the bishop, and that means Magnus wins the very first game with the black pieces. That was a really, really big victory for him. Now in the second game, it was Praggnanandhaa playing with the black pieces in a must-win situation. He needs to do something crazy, but he played the Sicilian. The Sicilian a la pin is a line Magnus played also in a must-draw situation with Gukesh earlier in the tournament, and Pragg really didn't get anywhere with the black pieces, had to settle for a draw on move 22, and that means that with 1.5 in the tiebreak, the new winner of the World Cup 2023 is Magnus Carlsen for the first time in his career. Fantastic performance, he totally deserved it. Even though he lacked motivation at the start, he was complaining that he was wondering himself what he is doing there, playing classical chess, but he showed that Wu is the best player still on earth. And of course, he had also food poisoning in the last couple of days. So very impressive performance by world's #1. I hope you like the coverage of this World Cup. And then I would like to thank you all for watching, but never go away. The channel is here to grow, and I'm going to cover a lot of other interesting events as well. Of course, also educational content. So just you're one click away from subscribing to the channel. I will really appreciate that support. Also give a like. Let me know what you think of Magnus's performance in the chat below, and then we see each other very soon again. Bye bye.